So recently, I was grabbing dinner with one of my friends who is a non-Malayali. We were traveling in my bike. I was driving. He was sitting behind me. Both of us had our helmets on, and we parked in a place. And we found a restaurant where we can have food. We parked in a place, and I was just about to walk into the restaurant where I took my helmet, put it on the bike, and I grabbed helmet from him and I put it on the bike. And immediately he was telling me, like, this is what is different about Kerala. We were in Kochi and trying to grab a dinner in Kochi. This is what is different in Kerala, because if it was in North India, and he is not from Kerala, he is from North India. He was telling me, if it was in North India, we'll all be afraid of somebody stealing our helmet. But in Kerala, the social trust is very high that you can keep this here. I told him, yeah, social trust, very nice. Let's go grab dinner, and we went and grabbed dinner. In this podcast, we want to talk about how a non-Malayali researcher who works in public policy and social sector looks at Kerala, and what are the things that he finds interesting about Kerala. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Nayadrishti podcast. As you might have already noticed, this time we're doing it a little bit differently. I am talking in English. The reason why we are doing this particular episode in English is to have one of our good friends, Fahad, with us and have him talk about his ideas and things and experiences about Kerala. So, first of all, I want to welcome Fahad. Fahad, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks a lot.
I'll just tell a little bit about our podcast, introduce Fahad, and we'll get to know Fahad a little more. So, Nayadrishti podcast is a podcast of an organization called Nayaneethi Policy Collective. I'm one of the co-founders of Nayaneethi Policy Collective. We work in the social sector, doing advocacy, research, consultancy, different sorts of work. You can go to our website and find out more about our organization. All the links about our organization you'll find in the show notes. And we've been doing Nayadrishti podcast for a while now. Usually we do in Malayalam. We want to reach out and talk to and discuss ideas about Kerala and about the world with the Malayali audience. But sometimes when we have special friends over, we want to talk about ideas in English as well. It's also because our friends who are non-Malayalis, who are non-Malayalam speakers, can also listen and share ideas with us. So this time we have Fahad over, and Fahad is somebody that we know for a while now, and he is someone who's located in Kerala, who is not from Kerala, but he's been working about Kerala and in Kerala for a while now. He writes about Kerala, he reads about Kerala, he talks about Kerala. So we'll give links to his socials in the show notes, and so that you can get to read more about his work. But first, we'll have Fahad talk about what he does and why he's interested in Kerala and what is a North Indian actually doing in Kerala. Studying about Kerala. So Fahad, why are you here in Kerala, bro?
Yeah, that's a interesting question, and I don't know what the most honest answer is. So, a little bit of context. I first visited Kerala in like 2023. I went to Kovalam to a resort and then went back to Delhi. So, I didn't really see anything. I was just in the resort for the whole time. And
Mm-hmm.
I had a good time, but I essentially forgot about Kerala. Okay, fine, great place, great beaches, and that's all. Somehow I ended up again in Kochi this time in August 2025. And this time I was staying in Kochi, so I experienced a lot of like the town and the cafes and things like that. And it seemed like a really interesting place. And I have this weird habit that wherever I go as a tourist, I'm like, yeah, I can totally imagine myself living here. I do this almost everywhere. So it was not very different. I was like, yeah, this is such a cool place. It would be so nice to live in Kochi and Kerala in general. But yeah, I just couldn't like forget about it for a while. And then because I was in Kerala, a lot of my Twitter feed was probably sourcing from the local account. So there are a couple of
Mm-hmm.
people who are talking a lot about policy in Kerala. So it just started coming on my Twitter feed, and I just got interested in looking at some of the things they were pointing at. Because in my head, it's like Kerala is the perfect place. It has solved all the problem. It's a heaven on earth, and so on and so forth. And
Mm-hmm.
these mostly Malayali people, some of them living outside, some of them living in Kerala, are pointing out all the flaws. So that was an eye opener for me, and the thing that ultimately made me like at least intellectually interested in Kerala was about that this is a place which has fairly high human capital by Indian
Mm-hmm.
standards. Yet even within South India, it is one of the It's a state which has one of the lowest economic growth rate measured as like GSDP growth rate essentially. So that is the puzzle that I was like a little confused about, because in North
Mm-hmm.
India, so I grew up in Bihar, and essentially, the key issues are like health, education, things like that. And there is an
Mm-hmm.
implicit argument always that, once you solve these basic problems, growth will follow. And Kerala seems to have, at least at a very decent level, achieved a lot of things in these basic areas, and there's a good human capital. Yet, it is performing less well than even Karnataka or Tamil Nadu, which are actually not that high on human capital compared to Kerala. So that is the puzzle intellectually, but a lot of it was also just my tourism motivated, I think, reasoning, and it just somehow worked like that.
Got it. Got it. Very nice. So something that puzzled you was basically a lot of human capital growth in terms of education and health and things like that, which is what a lot of North Indian states are trying to achieve. But Kerala has already achieved that. But compared to other states in the south, for example, at least Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, Kerala doesn't have the kind of economic growth in terms of mm, GSDP, that is gross domestic product, state domestic product. Growth is not there in Kerala. Okay, that interested you. Okay, so then why did you move to Kerala? What are you doing in Kerala now? What is your work like?
Yeah.
And can you tell a little more about that as well?
Sure. Basically, I am a researcher. Researcher is a heavy word, I guess, but I use it as a verb that I research things. I don't have a PhD or anything. I'm more comfortable calling myself a blogger. So I have a Substack and I write here and there. And yeah, I've been writing for a while, mostly on policy issues and mostly focused on India, covering economics, public policy, and society. But again, I also do a lot of random side quests. So yeah, I grew up in Bihar, did my schooling mostly there, and then I moved
Hmm.
to outskirts of Delhi at Ashoka University to do my undergraduate in political science. And after graduating, I joined this place called ID Insight, which is like a research and consulting organization that works with governments and nonprofits to do policy relevant research and consultancy support. So I had been working there for about 5 years. So I was already in that policy ecosystem, but it was a little bit like mostly focused on Delhi centric views of policy. Yeah. So that's my a little bit on my background. And then when I got interested in Kerala, I started thinking, what are the best ways to kind of answer this question? And because I was partly motivated by this like a touristic kind of venture, that it would be nice to actually move here and work here. And I do think that if you are studying a place, it's always good to be on the ground. So I pitched this kind of idea to Emergent Ventures, which have very kindly funded this move to Kerala, and I became a part-time at my erstwhile organization where I used to work at ID Insight. And then yeah, that's how I started. So the original idea was that I will start this dedicated Substack where I would just write about things that are inhibiting or potential areas for growth in Kerala. And it would be a mix of my like just generally living in Kerala and blogging like about my experiences, but also doing a lot of like some empirical research, largely based on secondary resources, but like trying to bring them together in some kind of a coherent narrative around what is lacking and what are the big sort of potential areas for Kerala. And that's what I've been doing for about 3-4 months now. I moved here in
Nice.
January, and since then I've been here.
All right. So, first thing that I want to know about you from this podcast, in this podcast, is like, many things I want to know about you. I mean, your work, your research, things that you've learned about Kerala. But the first thing before we start about your research and all the things that you read, all the serious stuff that we want to talk about Kerala, first thing I want to know is, just as somebody who is a non-Malayali living in Kerala, when you visited first time as a tourist, even this time when you're staying in Kerala and working, what is something that stood out for you about Kerala, right? Some good things, some bad things. How are Keralites treating you? How is just the general atmosphere? How is Malayalam sounding to your ears? So, how do you get by? Just want to know these things. So maybe a North Indian person's 101 about, getting through Kerala you know, would be a nice thing to start, I think. Nice way to start.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. I think, first, one of the most common things that I have seen in Kerala, like when people ask me, they obviously recognize that I'm not a Malayali, so they end up asking, okay, where are you from? Why are you here? And I give a little bit of brief, and everybody is so surprised. They're like, okay, so you are from Bihar and you want to work on policy problems, and you have come to Kerala because as if Bihar does not have a lot of its own problem. Then I try to give all my reasoning about, that yeah, a lot of problems in Bihar are policy problems, but they are also a lot of political problems which I am
Mm,
not the best person to kind of address, and there are a lot of people already working there. Anyway, this is something that I'm interested in, I'm here, and yeah, that's it. But that also tells you something about Kerala, that a lot of people don't really move to Kerala to actually work and like live long term. Is the sense that I
mm,
get. Maybe there is a little bit of IT industry and some people are coming, but I guess a lot of it is just the local population that end up in these places. In general, like I don't think people in Bangalore or Delhi are as surprised at anybody who has come to their city to work or do anything. Uh, so
mm,
yeah, that was a completely sort of unrelated tangent, but things that I have noticed as an outsider here, like one of the first things I guess you notice, especially I think I'm from Patna, so that place does not really have a great sort of distinction in maintaining cleanliness and hygiene and things like that. So everything just looks very clean. And at first, my instinct was, okay, there must be a lot of like action going on, like there must be thousands of sanitation workers and machinery and things like that. But I've spent a lot of time by now and I've hardly ever seen any like active cleaning going on. So I think a lot of it just comes down to basic civic sense, which you can't really
mm,
take for granted in most places in India. So it's very stark, at least to me. Now I think it's June, and like we are monsoon has officially kicked in Kerala, and I have not seen this much rain in my life. And everybody I tell, like when I mention rains, people start laughing and say, "This is not even started properly. What are you talking about? You have many
yeah,
months to go." So yeah, the rains thing is also interesting. I
mm,
moved to Kerala actually with my partner, and she has written a Substack piece about things she loves about Kochi. We can probably link that. But one of the
yeah,
things that is mentioned there is like there is this abundance of hand wash spaces in every eatery that you go. And
mm,
so this is again like very random pet peeve of mine that I need to wash my hands a lot. I just can't like live without washing my hands. And in every place in Delhi, like that's almost an afterthought. You have to go to the washroom and there's one small sort of hand washing space. But in Kerala, like there's dedicated hand wash space. Even a smallest eatery would have like three, four, wash
yeah,
stations that like, so I don't know. It is probably something to do with the cuisine that most people tend to eat with hands. But again, even in North India, most people are eating with hands. There is something, I guess, there's a long history of public health and, that kind of awareness.
mhm,
People smile a lot. You just are
mm,
walking around. If you have like a, eye contact, they would just give you a gentle smile. And again, this is something I've seen outside India a lot, and I absolutely loved it. That like this is just basic kindness and niceness that you feel like just walking around, and I didn't really experience this much in Delhi or otherwise. So this is also like one of the things that I absolutely love. um, what else? Police, like I don't feel scared when I look at the police here, like in Delhi or even in Patna. Like the general, I don't know that I have done nothing wrong, but the general instinct when you see a policeman, you're like, yeah, I just want to avoid any like interaction whatsoever. But I saw
yeah,
people here are very chill about police. So there was some
mm,
random dog in our colony, and it seemed like a pet dog, but somebody probably abandoned the dog. And we were like, okay, what to do? And people were like, yeah, let's call the police. I'm like, okay, is that an option here? Like people consider that as the first option. Like mostly
mm,
police is the last option for anything that we consider, and people just call and they were
mm,
nice. So again, it's one of the things you should not, I guess, take for granted in most places in India.
Mm,
Finally, there's this one thing in general in like all public spaces, you see a lot of women,
mm,
especially in like people facing service sector. So in restaurants, like a lot of waiter, or in all kinds of like ticket stations and things like that. In Delhi, you would see a lot of women in very specific areas which are more posh and more like high profile. But in Patna and even in like Delhi, in most at like if you go to a median income type of place, you would not see as
mm,
many women if in like public transport, etc. So yeah, these are some of the random assortment of I guess observations. Again, my
yeah.
big caveat is that I've never lived in South India, so I don't know how much of this is just like North versus South difference versus
Mm.
specifically Kerala, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Even I don't think it's a north versus south thing at all, but it's just a Kerala thing. And, as we say, every state in Kerala is, I mean, in India is different as much as, I mean, such a difference exists between every district in Kerala as well. But anyway, so all these things are the things that you love. It was so nice hearing all these wonderful things about Kerala, getting goosebumps over here as a proud Malayali. But anything that you hate about Kerala? Anything that didn't sit well with you? Anything like that? But keep it short though, just so that the Malayalis are not angry.
Yeah, no, I know. I maybe I'm like too enamored. It's my early few, months, but I don't really recall something that I absolutely hate. There is one weird issue, which I then discovered is like potentially a policy problem. Is that waste management is like a big thing. It's a big sort of nightmare. So I never had to think about, like where will a particular kind of waste go. So in
Mm,
Delhi, like I just throw everything in, and there is a person who used to collect. And so I'm all for like segregation and everything. So I was very happy when when I moved here. The apartment secretary told me this is how you segregate, and like there are these many categories, etc. All good, but I also have pets. So and there are two cats, and they poop and they pee. So there is that waste that which like almost everybody anybody who has a cat, they have this litter system where you have to collect it and it goes in a particular thing. So then I asked them like, okay, so where does this go? And they were like, yeah, there is no category for this. So
yeah.
like you can't throw this. I was like, what does that mean? Like there has to be some system. Like either you tell
Mm,
me an area where there is a government facility where you can throw this kind of quote unquote sanitary waste. They were like, no, there
mm,
is no system. So there are some private companies. I don't know what their legal status is, what they do with it. I like after a lot of research, I found this one company that sort of agreed to do this waste pickup. So yeah, again, this is
oh,
again like a very random thing, but I went into a little bit of like detail at some point, and I think I will write about Kerala's broken waste management. But there is
yeah,
essentially no centralized waste management in Kerala. Also, like a lot of waste that goes into the backwaters and the sea, it's like
yeah.
untreated waste, and Kerala has one of the lowest like waste treatment when it comes to liquid and sewage waste.
So you've kind of briefly touched upon waste management and the policies and the issues surrounding that, of course, from your own experiences. So I want to get more into some of those issues that you talk about. Again, to all those who are listening, Fahad has a great articles on Substack that he writes about Kerala and about things other than Kerala also. So go through that. We'll put that in the show notes. But I just want you to talk about some things that you've learned about Kerala, things that you've been researching about Kerala, especially areas. And first, I want to talk about areas in which you think Kerala has kind of succeeded. Here, if you can go through one after the other, maybe I've read your articles where you talk about health, education, nursing, some of these areas, public health. So, some things that stood out for you where you think Kerala has succeeded as opposed to other states, and what are your observations on those things? That would be, I think, very useful because you're someone who has done a lot of research and talking and meeting people and talking to them and about all this. So, yeah. So, what are some areas where you think Kerala has really succeeded?
Yeah, as you and I guess the listeners know, success in public policy is kind of always relative. So, like when I say like Kerala has succeeded in XYZ, generally means that it's done much better than most other places in India, and it's sort of an acceptable level. Like the primary, I guess, stereotypical candidates for things that are good in Kerala are always health and education. Education is a little bit of a, I think, it requires a lot of nuance. So
Mhm.
there is like this primary education, which is your schooling, and then there is higher education, universities, etc. I don't
Mm.
think Kerala has done very well in higher education. So
Mhm.
yeah, like jury is very much out on the higher education bit, but at least on primary, in some aspects, it's done well. Like on all the basic inputs, like 100% enrollment and having schools in every spread across where people live, etc.
Mm.
Again, historically, I think Kerala has always been like way ahead compared
Mm.
to most other states. Even pre-independence, there is a history of relatively higher level of literacy and penetration of like primary schools in Kerala, mostly community run. Uh, but in terms of outcomes, like outcomes as in like whether a person, kid who is in standard two, can they read something that a typical student in standard two would be required to read, or can they do the basic arithmetic that expected from somebody in class two? Uh, Kerala is like reasonably decent. It's been above the national average. So there is this annual survey of annual. Sorry, I don't
Yeah.
remember the
Acer?
Acer, but I
Yeah.
don't remember.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
like pre-COVID, Kerala has been generally higher than the national average on like both arithmetic, reading. But again, post-COVID, it has taken a hit, and the gap is narrower with compared to like the national average. And on
Mhm.
arithmetic, it's actually below national average. So again, there was a historical advantage in primary education, which the gap has always like has been narrowing steadily, and it's you can argue that in some cases it's almost like converged with the national average. Health, I think, is interesting. Uh, Here I don't really have a lot of data points, but like it just seems like I mean, in the sense that data points about specific like hospitals, etc. But if you look at if you've lived here, if you have some basic experience of healthcare, it's absolutely excellent. Like even the government facilities are pretty good. You can expect good quality treatment, and like there aren't you have the basic facilities available in all government facilities, and the private infrastructure is even more impressive. And there's a whole bouquet of private infrastructure, which are like these budget private hospitals. There are a bunch of charity hospitals, and you get the most sort of high end hospitals, which are catering to some of the richest people, but also catering to a lot of, I guess, the international like medical tourism type of audience.
Yeah.
Uh, and in India, we often like conflate, healthcare and public health. So healthcare is when something happens to you, you go to the hospital and get treated. Public health is doing all the things that don't fall sick in the first place. And the typical example would be like mosquito prevention, so that you don't get malaria, dengue, maintaining
Yeah.
roads cleanliness, etc. And I think uh, like at least at a headline level, Kerala seems to have done pretty well on public health by Indian standards. Uh, any sort of new disease, you would always read that, oh, 3 people detected in Kerala, and like you would think that okay, that's a bad thing. Any new disease, it always starts with Kerala, but it generally, my sense is that because the level of testing and population level testing and just the general machinery is much more up to date, you see these cases first appear in Kerala. Even in COVID, like the
Mhm.
first cases came, Kerala also has a lot
Mm.
of experience with Nipah virus and things like that. So,
Mm.
and generally, if you look at the big sort of health metrics around like maternal mortality and infant mortality, expect like life expectation and things like that, Kerala is almost always like top three state, or usually it's the top state on most of these metrics. If you look at the larger Indian states, so these are the health and education we kind of know. Education is a bit of a mixed story. Health is, I think, a pretty good story.
Yeah.
Um, and then nursing in the sense that okay, healthcare is good. You get good nurses here. That is kind of a given. But also in a lot of like labor exports, it's pretty well known that Kerala nurses are you would spot them in most places in India. There are like, in almost all hospitals, there is at least a few nurses who are from Kerala, and also internationally, it's now uh,
mm,
a big sort of places of route for labor migration. So I think again here Kerala as a state has kind of exploited its comparative advantage that it might have had due to all kinds of historical reasons. Um, like relatively higher levels of education from early on kind of gave a big base from which you could train nurses, and there were Christian missionaries who were already in this kind of caregiving kind of ecosystem that are internationally connected. So you
mm,
had this kind of situation where like there is just generally more also openness to emigrate, again for maybe historical reasons, I don't know, but ultimately what we have ended up with is that Kerala is producing very high number of nurses and medical professionals, like in excluding even doctors, it's doing fine, I guess. Um,
mm,
it fulfills its own requirements, but there is a lot of surplus uh, nurses that end up emigrating within India, but also abroad.
mm.
This is the health and education story. I can talk a little bit more about. Again, this is now this was a more, I guess, like, data-based story. Uh,
Yeah.
which I have based on like vibes. One is I think road infrastructure. I have not seen bad quality roads in Kerala so far. Like even in the remotest areas, road is pretty good, and I don't know what the reasons behind it is. It's just an observation.
Mhm,
And law and order also, I think policing is pretty good. Here there is actually a little bit of data. So if you look at the number of reported cases, Kerala is actually pretty high,
mm,
and it's it's wrong to actually interpret that crime is high in Kerala,
mm,
because people are just reporting crime in Kerala, and if you look at the murder rates or homicide rates, Kerala is actually one of the lowest. So despite one of the highest levels of reported crime, it has some of the least numbers of these homicides, which is a much better marker of actual crime because serious crimes almost get reported in almost all places. So yeah,
mhm.
this is interesting, I guess, success stories from Kerala.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So you spoke about health and education, and nursing becomes an aspect of that, as well as you spoke about road infrastructure and law and order and things like this. In something about health and education that you mentioned about the higher education quality being low. Now that is something interesting about Kerala, right? Because primary education quality and even school education in Kerala, the quality is very high in terms of enrollments, in terms of literacy. Although the ASA report is showing that there has been some declines since COVID. uh, Generally, the primary education ecosystem is very good. Government schools are really good compared to other government schools in other states. Again, compared to private schools in the state, usually I think parental preference would be like they would rather send their kids to private schools or at least government aided schools, and then only to government schools. But even then, government schools have good quality in Kerala. But then the higher education ecosystem in Kerala is extremely poor, right? Students who migrate to Kerala to study in Kerala colleges are very low. But if you take students from Kerala who go to other states in India, but other countries around the world to study, are extremely high. And some of these students, in the past, when you look at the migration data in Kerala, in the past, people used to migrate, send money back home, and after some time, they come back to Kerala. But these days, it's students going outside of Kerala, settling there, even in different states of India, but most importantly, different countries around the world. But also in health and education, something that I find interesting is, and again, this is a sense that I have, is we had this conversation recently about the missing middle, right? There's a lot of health and education infrastructure which caters, which provides free healthcare or free education, right? Government institutions, so very low fees healthcare institutions, or very low fees education institutions. But at the same time, you have very high quality, very high paying, in the sense like very expensive uh, health institutions, and as well as education institutions, schools where fees is very high, hospitals where the hospital charges are very high, but the quality is very high. So in some ways, a concentration I feel like is happening towards very high end medical institutions or educational institutions, and very okay quality or moderate quality but very cheap institutions on the other side. And somehow there is a missing middle that is emerging, where the middle class is finding it hard to send their children. They want high quality education but they can't afford it, or they want high quality healthcare but they can't afford it, especially given the fact that Kerala is aging, and there's a lot of multi-morbidity issues in Kerala. So all these things, but yeah, we can talk about more of this in further iterations of our podcast. I don't want to get more into that, just wanted to put some ideas over here. But more importantly, I want to talk about the issues that you talk about in your blogs about Kerala, right? Some of the issues that you find, and I find some of these things that you write very interesting, right? Although Kerala is successful in many areas, like you said in the beginning, human capital, there is an economic capital growth issue that Kerala is facing. And recently, as everybody who's listening know, Kerala put out a white paper on the fiscal health of Kerala, where the debt burden in Kerala is very high now. And on top of that, we are offering free bus rides to women and all these things. That is, the new government's campaign promises are being implemented, which will take more out of the public exchequer's money. That means we are probably going into more debt, so we need to solve this issue of getting more growth. That growth issue is something that we need to solve. While human capital growth is some ways addressed, economic capital growth is something that we need to address, right? So what are your observations on this, and even generally, what are areas that you think where Kerala has in some ways there is room for improvement, or in Kerala has failed miserably, or where the governance is, like you say in one of your articles, where the governance is broken, right? So what are some areas do you think where Kerala needs to improve?
Yeah, I think uh, before like getting to specific areas, I just like how I have mentally sort of arrived at a model for Kerala in general is that uh, most aspects where government has kind of played a facilitative role or have done like some sensible regulation, those things have turned out pretty well in Kerala. Wherever government has thought that we will monopolize and we will do these things and we will deliver the services directly, things have not gone that well. And so that's why I think that that's one thing to generally keep in mind. But I think one of the areas that I am interested in is like office space availability, and you don't really think about this in most places in India, because India is a very vast country and there's a lot of land and space available. um, and I like for the longest time also didn't think about it even in Kerala. But generally, like, I started reading some of these articles that there is like 2 year waiting time for a lot of firms who want to open their offices in Kochi, because some allotment needs to happen. Now, again, I
Mm,
think there are two type of things. So there is some like government built office spaces, and there is some private estates. But because of a large number of reasons that I have kind of talked about in one of the articles, briefly speaking, like I think the land reforms in Kerala, while they did a lot of good, they also broke down the land sizes. So each person, like, there are a lot of land parcels, but having one large contiguous parcel is very unlikely, because families can't have beyond a certain limit. Uh,
mm,
and so you have like this problem of like, if you want to build a large factory or if you want to build like a global capability center, you have to individually kind of negotiate with so many people who own one big parcel of land. So that's again like that's adds a lot of transaction cost to if you want to do any large scale kind of work. And on top of that, for the longest time there wasn't a lot of interest in like private capital, or there was an overt sort of aversion to private capital, because it was thought of as like they are here to profiteer and make money and they will destroy the state. I think that like has improved quite a bit, at least in like their rhetoric. Most both LDF and UDF now talk about private capital and investment friendly and things like that. So that's a good thing that has happened. But at a policy level, it is still, I think, difficult in Kerala to find uh, a large contiguous parcel of land.
mm,
One is obviously the legacy of the land reforms, but also the geography of Kerala is such that there is a lot of, like, you have the Western Ghats in large parts, which is a protected zone, so you can't do much there. And you have some hilly areas which also occupy a good enough, like, significant proportion of your land. So what you are
mhm,
left with is like a narrow coastal belt, and there's a little bit of there's some midland. And here
yeah,
there are these only two places where you can build. So effectively, you don't have a lot of land if in Kerala. That is, I think, fair to say. But even
mm,
the land that is already there is not trivial. Like, it's comparable to the available land that is there in very successful and high income economies like Vietnam and Taiwan. But you don't get that kind of output from the same amount of available land in Kerala. And that is, I think, partly because the productive use of land, like the land productivity, is much lower in Kerala. So if you just like drive around, you will see a lot of like large mansions, mostly like single storied homes. So three people living in like a very large land parcel. You will
mm,
see very little vertical growth. If you take metro in Kochi, the metro is the highest thing in most of the areas, uh, which is like unbelievable for a place that is kind of like land scarce. If you have less land, you
mm,
should build higher and higher so that you can accommodate more people and more activities in a smaller land size. So, uh, yeah, this, like, at a very first glance, I found a little odd that why is there so much, like, less. Why is there so much like dispersion of activities instead of just vertical development? And I think some of it might be cultural, like maybe people have gotten used to living in a large house, and
mm,
that's a cultural thing. I don't know, and I can't say too much about it. But at least there is a lot of it that can be explained through policy. And again, Kerala, I don't think, is like particularly bad with some of these things, like not allowing vertical growth after a certain extent, which is
mm,
uh, called like floor area ratio, or FSI, floor space index in India. But because Kerala has like less land availability, all these problems that are also existing in many other states become much more important in
true.
Kerala.
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
in addition, there are some specific, peculiarities in Kerala, uh, which is all the more surprising given that it is already land scarce, and it makes usage of that land more difficult. So there is this act called Paddy and Wetland Conservation Act, which does not allow you to use paddy land and wetland for any other purposes. Uh, it makes like a little bit of sense from environmental standpoint if you're looking at wetland, because in a lot of large cities in India, you like a lot of construction has happened on wetland, and when floods come, things collapse. So I can still understand the logic behind wetland, but paddy land I don't get. Like, I know there is a reasoning that they due to submersion farming, like, it absorbs a lot of water and it can retain some water, so it can prevent flooding. But the impact of paddy land in preventing flood is not that high. And the cost you are paying, so much land that you can't use for any other purpose, is again, like, you can think about better ways to avoid flooding, use like more scientific methods that are more effective instead of just blocking that paddy land. And it's not just like you can't use that paddy land for any other purposes. You have essentially, the law has uh, like made it, basically, it created a snapshot of all the paddy land that was there in 2008. Now we are in 2026. If somebody has stopped doing paddy farming in 2008, and that land is like basically lying fallow. There's no paddy farming happening. You can still
Mm,
not do anything about it, because
yeah.
in 2008, if anything has been categorized as paddy land, you can't do anything on it
Mm,
forever. There is no process for conversion for a post 2008 paddy land. So it just doesn't make any sense to me. And
mm-hmm,
I would love to also hear your take if there is some kind of a very uh like political angle to it. But I don't get it. Like, why paddy land? Why not some other kind of land? And why 2008? And why would you like pause it for infinite time practically?
yeah.
So and again, in a lot of uh these are some anecdotal examples. So I'm also planning to work on some kind of a satellite imagery based analysis to see how much of paddy land is there in some of these urban cores, which are high economic activities, where you can actually this land can be very useful in a place where there is 2 years waiting for office spaces. But
Mm-hmm,
yeah, a lot of these like paddy lands are there in these cities like Thrissur, etc., which are major hubs. But in the middle of the city, you have this vacant land because it was notified as a paddy land and you can't do much about it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Okay, I don't know why 2008 and why I know the politics behind the paddy land. I mean, I have my intuitions, but I don't think it's worth sharing here. But yeah, but I think that would be interesting to look at. And then if I find anything interesting about that, I'll put that in the show notes. And if anybody has any ideas, please do comment under the video. But Fahad, I just want you to talk a little more about that private capital, I mean the disinterest or hostility that Keralites have towards private capital. And I just want to hear your take on that. And why do you think that is important for going forward and the growth trajectory that Kerala kind of needs given the fiscal scenario we are in? So can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, sure. The hostility to private capital is something like, it's not my sort of original observation. It's largely coming from this excellent book, by the way, by Tirthankar Roy and K. Kavi Raman, where they talk about, historically, like Kerala was a thriving hub uh, of exports and a lot of like cosmopolitan activity happening. And this was 1800s and 1700s, when it's hard to think that, but there was very little scope and role of the government back then. Like, yeah, there was a Maharaja, etc., but most things were just happening by people and society doing things. So
Yeah.
the most sort of quote unquote glorious uh, era of Kerala was when most of these activities were essentially private capital led activities. So all these spice gardens and large tea estates and things like that, they were all basically private capital. So it's not like Kerala has not had private capital. Most of its success always came from a lot of these investments from private capital, which made it the place that it is. But in like after independence, there was this general, not just in Kerala, across India, there was this general idea that we want to be, because we had colonization,
Mm,
and colonization came through the East India Company. There was this kind of, I would say, over learning from that experience that this private capital is very harmful and can never be trusted. And then Nehru and others were deeply distrustful, and then India went on this route of like not allowing private capital from abroad, but also not letting a lot of these domestic industries flourish. So what India did, I think Kerala did with like 10x intensity, because it's always an overachiever, right? And all good things and bad things. So, so I think that sort of psyche and that instinctive approach within like the policy and the government ecosystem stayed for a while, even after all these like 1991 reforms, that there are still echoes of that way of thinking, I guess,
yeah.
which is still there. Because yeah, I think because the intensity of those uh, beliefs was maybe a little higher in Kerala than in many other places. uh, I think some of it is changing now, at least uh, in like what uh, political leaders and bureaucrats are saying. We will know whether they are actually making such policies only with time. But I think that is changing, and it's very important to understand that, like, you have had this many years of like pretty good governance, in the sense that, we discussed this health education thing. Like, government did a reasonably good job from an Indian sort of standards, and this is where you are. It's a good place to be in, like, compared to, many years ago, or compared to many other states. But we are still at like 3,000 US dollars per capita income, roughly. Um Still not good enough. Like, you're not even like a middle income place. So you can't say, okay, we have reached where we wanted to reach. There's still so much to go.
Mhm.
And I just spoke about like Taiwan and Vietnam, which are like almost 10x where Kerala is, with the same amount of land and similar kind of resources. So why can't we aim that higher? And
Mhm.
for that, you will need private capital, because government has shown the maximum it can do in these many years. This was when, the budget situation and the fiscal situation was probably much better. Now it's only going to get worse if things does not change.
Mhm.
So even for government to work better, you need more fiscal power in the government. The government needs to
Yeah.
raise revenue, and for that you need economic growth. So if nothing else, at least for the government to do better, you need more private capital and more economic activity, so that that can be taxed.
Got it. All right. Interesting. Thank you so much, Fahad. So, interesting ideas. Things that you spoke about land and importance of more private capital. And earlier we spoke about health and education. Interesting ideas, all of this. And again, we'll put your writings on the show notes, and if anybody is interested, they can go and read more. But before we go, finally, I want to ask you about what are some resources that you would suggest to anybody who wants to understand more about Kerala, because you're somebody who started with no exposure with Kerala, at least living here only. What you hear in news and passively whatever you consume wherever you were. So if somebody from outside Kerala, even someone within Kerala wants to learn more about Kerala, where should they start and how should they go about it? I know that you are also in the process of knowing more, and can you take us a little bit through your journey of understanding Kerala, and what you read and what you watch and what you hear and things like that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think my reading list is not very impressive on Kerala, and I think one of the big reasons is that I am not uh, like reading things that are specifically about Kerala, because what ends up happening is that uh, you lose a larger like comparative perspective. So what I have been doing largely as a method is that I'm still reading the kind of things I used to read, which are mostly like India focused. So you would like the Karthik Muralidharan book, or like Arvind Subramanyam and Devesh Kapoor have the new book. But now I look specifically at Kerala related things, whatever they are saying, or specifically in the data, like things that you are talking about, like generally about India, but I'm focusing a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more on Kerala. So that's like a general sort of approach. But I mentioned this book a little while ago, but I think Tirthankar Roy and K. Kavi Raman's book, Kerala 1956 to present, that is became like my basic, I think, starting point, and that has sort of informed like my how I've structured this work. And
Mm-hmm.
I continue to keep referring to that book, because it just brings together a lot of literature around economics and economic history and just general history about Kerala in one place. So I think if you are not familiar with Kerala, or even if like I think you want a good economic history of Kerala, this is like a must read. There is
Yeah.
this other interesting book which is called Below the Radar by Balagopal. He is somebody who was, I think, an IAS officer in Kerala pre 90s. So, this like not a post liberalization phenomena. And at that point, he decided to leave the services and start a company. And I think he has been very successful. And he's written a book about how uh, firms kind of, there are these like small or like medium sized firms that have proliferated in Kerala, but they're not very big, but they're very innovative, and a lot of interesting things are happening. But because they are not very large, they kind of go quote unquote below the radar. You won't see or hear about them very much. So it's an interesting, I think, counter to what I have been saying, that there isn't a lot of economic activity. But again, I think below the radar kind of work is a good starting point. But for mass employment and prosperity, you actually need a lot more of this and very many large firms. Um, there's this other book I'm starting. I've just started to read, so I can't say too much about it. But it's about, because I was reading about nursing, I stumbled upon this book, which is called Moving with the Times.
Mhm.
And it's about, I think, migration of nurses in India generally. But because most nurses in India that migrate are from Kerala, it's
From
effectively
Kerala.
a book about Kerala. From some of my friends who are very much into movies, etc., they keep saying that Malayalam cinema is literally the best, not one of the best in India. And I think, like, uh, this is one thing where I have been thinking about, that I will watch and I will get into it. I haven't really watched a lot of movies yet, but
Mhm.
I think I will, and I have watched a few, and they are very good. And you get a very, like, texture. Yeah. Now that I live here, I watched some movies when I wasn't living here, and yeah, I
Mhm.
enjoyed it. But once you have spent a little bit of time, and I could see like how they capture the nuances and the
Mhm.
texture of life here. So again, if you want to get a good day-to-day perspective of life in Kerala, watch Malayalam movies. Uh, I think a lot of my sort of ideas about like things that I should pursue or write about comes from some like interesting Twitter accounts I have come across over time. I can maybe like link them in the show notes.
Please.
But
Yeah.
yeah, actually, it's a funny story. So one of the Twitter accounts is the reason why I ended up in Kerala, because like I was mentioning how when I came here in Kochi as a tourist, these things started appearing. But there was this one person called Rishi who is very very passionate about Thrissur and land use and things like that. That I just kept seeing it over and over, and I just started reading up more. Um, there is this famous book which I haven't read, but which I plan to read. It's my reading list, by Robin Jeffrey, called Politics, Women and Wellbeing, which is about like how Kerala became quote unquote a model. Is a book from a little while ago, but it's kind of a canonical read. Um, what else? Yeah, I think apart from all the resources, etc., I would highly recommend anybody who's like even remotely interested about Kerala after watching this to visit, and not just go to some resort and go back to where you come from, but actually try to visit one of the places where people live, and there are cafes and places, and just walk around a little bit, talk to people. That's generally the best way to kind of appreciate a place. For policy, actually, so I was telling how I generally look at India wide readings,
Yeah.
then I look at Kerala numbers. But then when I have some sort of idea, then I start digging further into like Kerala related specific papers, etc. So one is that I would do like a general uh, search around like papers that are written. But I think there are CPPR articles that I have found really useful in a lot of
Yeah.
my work previously. They also have some interesting reports, etc., which uh, you do like you go deep enough in most of the issues, there would be some CPPR resource. The fiscal health white paper that you recently mentioned, I think it's for like if you are a policy geek, that's again a good source. And the Kerala migration survey reports are very good. So a lot of story about Kerala is actually a story of migration. It's
Mhm.
good, and it's potential dangers in the long run. So those reports give like they are obviously a huge like treasure of data, but also I think the narrative etc. is also very interesting to understand.
Got it.
And yeah, I think so again, this is I don't actively go out and look for these things, but whenever I am doing some sort of research around a question, some of the best sort of like numbers or data points randomly I've come across is from two specific sources, which is like Manorama and South First. I think they do some interesting like journalism, which is also grounded in a lot of empirical work.
Got it. Interesting. Okay. All right. So we'll put some of these things in the show notes and everybody can look through them. And so far, thank you so much for being part of this podcast. All the ideas that you shared have been interesting.
Having like,
I'm, yeah, really looking forward to reading more articles and ideas that you write about, from your research. And hopefully you stay more in Kerala so that we don't have to do much work. We can read your work and build on top of that with all the research that you're doing. But anyway, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. Hoping to have you more in the future. Talk about other ideas that you understand and work about in Kerala. All right. So everybody who's been part of who've been listening to us, thank you. Thanks a lot. If you have any questions to Fahad or to us, please put them in the comments. Be sure to visit the show notes and go through the readings that we put over there. Thank you so much. See you next week with a new episode. Bye bye. Bye,
yes,
Fahad.
thank you, and my apologies that I don't speak Malayalam. Hopefully, by the next time when I'm here, I would at least have some basic fluency. That's my plan.
All right. Let's see. All right. Bye bye.